I'm Sarah, and this is Teddy. I am hearing impaired. I'm completely deaf in one ear and I can't tell directions. So Teddy helps me with that. He helps me find things. He's trained how to find certain noises. He also does other things like deep pressure therapy for when I'm a little agitated. And then we've also worked out that he alerts to migraines. So if I've got something coming on and I don't know whether it's a headache or an actual migraine and which drug to take, he actually alerts when it's a proper migraine and I know I have to take the prescription medicine. Now, I'm originally from Australia where I was a child actor, and then I moved to the US about 20 years ago, but I am currently moving home to Australia, which is easy for me. I get on a plane and I go. It's not as easy for my husband, and especially not for Teddy. Now, moving to Australia with a dog is a huge ordeal, and there's a lot of information out there about moving with a pet dog, but I had a real hard time finding information about moving with a service dog or an assistance dog. So I thought I would make a real brief video on what that's like. We're not quite done yet. I'll keep doing updates, but I thought, if people are looking for information, you guys can come here and follow the journey of how interesting it is. So I first decided I was going to move home well over a year ago, and we had put in the paperwork and we had started it, and we were originally doing Teddy as a pet. He had already been a service dog in the US, but he wasn't qualified through ADI yet. So we were doing the paperwork, and then we found someone who would help us switch over. But then Australia changed some rules. Then the time was running out, so we ended up stopping and then starting again with the new rules. Now, whether you're taking a service dog or a regular pet, it is at least a 7-month experience, because you've got to do an RNAT test, which is basically a rabies test, and you have to wait 180 days from when you first do that blood test to when they can arrive in Australia. It's a minimum 180 days that you're looking at. So if you're just going to Australia for 6 months, just find someone to pet sit your dog. Only take your dog if you are moving for at least a couple years, because it is a long ass process, not only for the 6 months and all the testing, and it is crazy expensive, but also when you get there, if you have a normal dog, they're gonna have to do at least 10 days quarantine. Teddy is gonna fly in cabin with me, and he will do 10 days of home quarantine. But even that, we're flying from San Antonio to LA, and then from LA to Sydney, and that flight's 15 hours. So that is a long time for a dog to be in cabin. I mean, you think about how agitated people are. Teddy's super chill, but I imagine at some point he may get a little tired of being cooped up. I'm also thinking that I really need to get him used to using puppy pads again, because he hasn't used one since he was a tiny puppy. We lived on a boat when he was little. He had puppy pads the first couple months, and then we just always took him out on deck. And I imagine during the flight at some point I'm going to need to pull a puppy pad out in the bathroom and let him go, because 15 hours is a long time. He can hold it for at least 12. But I don't want to make him hold it for 15, especially when we get off the flight. He's going to be met by people from DAF, and so I don't want him to pee on anybody's shoes. Now, in the US, you can have any dog and call it a service dog. As long as you have a disability and you kind of train it, everybody here has a service dog. But Australia actually has standards, and they expect you to have a dog that is properly trained. You can't just slap a vest on it and call it a service dog or an assistance dog. It has to be trained, and it has to always wear its jacket in public, and you have to have a card, and they don't get to fly everywhere. They don't get to do all of the things that people in the US do. Now, we looked into a couple of ADI facilities here in the US, because in the States you can train your own service dog, and you can technically in Australia as well, but you have to be able to pass tests and do all that stuff. To import Teddy to Australia, he had to be certified by a facility, and not just any facility, but by an ADI facility. Now, there was one place in Austin but they wanted like 6 months to a year. It was going to be another 5 to 10 grand. And at that point, I didn't think I had the time. We did do a lot of their lessons. We went up to Austin a lot. We partook in several of their classes. We went out on the field trips. We did all this stuff. But I knew it wasn't going to be quick enough for us. And thankfully, we found a lady called Lisa from Assistance Paws International. Someone had recommended her to us in a Facebook group, and we met up with her and talked about it, and she helped us go through the process of getting Teddy certified to Australian standards. Now, if you've already got an assistance dog or a service dog from a facility, like you got them from someone like a PTSD dog or a hearing dog or a guide dog that you got from a facility, none of this will apply to you. You should already have the paperwork, and then you can just put that stuff in your packet. There's a whole packet, but you can already do that and you can skip this whole part. But if you've got a self-trained dog, you're gonna have to get someone to certify them to a certain standard. You're gonna have to do the public access test. You're gonna have to show that you've done at least 180 hours of service dog training with your dog. Now, I got Teddy when he was 8 weeks old, and we bought him from a breeder who specialized in dogs that ended up becoming service dogs. They bred for that temperament. And we legit started training him from 8 weeks old on how to go out in public. And at the time, we lived in Key West, and it was the most dog-friendly city, probably in the entire US. He was welcome to go pretty much everywhere. So he was trained from day one on how to act in restaurants and bars and on the street and in public. It was probably the best place to train a dog, a future service dog, for all of the things. The only problem we had was he was a little bit too social, because he got used to drunk people all touching him. And so when we went through the actual training to get him ready for the public access test, we had to learn how to dial that back so that he wasn't quite so excited. Like, he's still such a happy boy. He goes to the vet, like we were at the vet yesterday, and they do all kinds of things to him, and he still just like loves them to death. He is the happiest dog in the entire world. Now, in addition to Teddy's paperwork, which was showing the 180 hours, like he's been flying all over the US. He's been to like Boston and New York, and like when we lived in Key West, he would fly to San Antonio. He goes to Austin. He's been to Minnesota. He's been to San Diego. Like, he has legit traveled more in the US than I think a lot of Americans have. But it's not just Teddy. In the packet that we had to provide for the people in Australia, we also had to show all of my paperwork, which meant I had to go to the ENT and get a letter from the doctor stating that I had a hearing disability that the dog serviced me for. If you have like a psychiatric condition, you're going to need a letter from probably a psychiatrist. You can get a letter from your regular doctor. So I had one, I'd gone to my local clinic and gotten a letter, but it turned out it was like a nurse practitioner, and so I had to go and find an actual ENT and redo that again. So it can be expensive because you've got to visit all of these doctors and you've got to get all of these letters, and then the vet visits are so many. So you're gonna have to go to the vet like 1,000 times. We started off with the RNAT test, which is the rabies test, and you should have already had your dog having rabies shots, but if you didn't, you're gonna have to get the rabies shot, wait a couple months, and then do the RNAT tests. And then, I mean, he gets all of his regular shots anyway, so that's not an extra expense for us because we were always on top of all of his shots, because he does fly all the time and you have to show that for the transportation people. But besides that, then like once we've done the 6 months, then there's also a whole bunch of other vets. And then even once because you have to have your regular vet do an ID scan, which is where they scan him with his microchip, take the photo. And then you have to take it to a second vet who does the exact same thing. And then you have to take those 2 certificates and send that into the USDA, who verifies that the 2 vets have checked your dog. So that's another expense. And then you've got all these different shots. And then as an assistance dog, you don't have to pay, but otherwise you do have to pay. And I had kept my original application. So I had already paid like the $500, whatever it was, and they were like, you can do it again, we'll refund the money. I'm like, no, it's already in there, he's already got a number, let's just keep it the same but update it to be a service dog. And then once he is approved, which took like 8 months, he was approved, and then you still got more vet visits. There's a list that it says, and it can be a little bit confusing because it's like within 45 days of arrival, you have to do this, and more than 30 days out, you have to do that. So what I worked out is that you can actually consolidate several of those visits so that you're not going legit every 6 days to the vet. But you have to book your flight and know that you're going to have the flight, because you have to count back down from there. So once you've hit your under 180 days and you've got your permit, you're going to book the flight, and then from there count back, because there's a vet visit within 5 days before travel to Australia, which means I'm doing it like the 3 days before, because if there's any reason my flight is delayed, I want to make sure that we are still within our 5 days. And so from there, you've got a 14 days before that, which is our visit yesterday, where he had to have an internal parasite treatment. And the one 2 weeks ago was the one where he had to have an external parasite treatment, because even though he takes the pills for fleas and ticks, Australia wants you to have basically a flea dip, which is where they spray him with stuff, and it stank so bad. And then they also do tests, and then right before we leave, they did a leishmaniasis test. And if you've been to like Africa, they want you to have like all these tests that you could pick up in Africa. And depending on where you're coming from, there are different tests. And thankfully, I mean, America's like a group 3, but there's even lower than that. But there's a lot more tests here than there would be if we were just like, say, in New Zealand or Guam or like Hawaii, because Hawaii is like Australia where they don't have a lot of diseases. But yesterday was our second last visit. So it was an internal parasite treatment. They checked him over, like did the scan. Every time we go to the vet, they have to do the scan and verify that it's him. And then our next visit, which is the one right before we leave, there's another whole bunch of blood tests. It seems like there's a lot of blood tests. And they have to do blood tests to make sure that he's still healthy. They do a full physical exam to make sure that he's okay to fly. There's another external parasite treatment. I think there's a couple other things, and then there is like the book of paperwork that I have to take with me on the plane, so that when we are met by DAF in Australia, I have literally an entire dossier of stuff on Teddy to show that he is healthy, that he's had all of his exams, he's had all of his shots, and you know, all the other stuff, all of his training paperwork, all of those things. So while it is initially you think it's going to be cheaper to take a service dog to Australia from the US, it is, because if he was flying as a pet, he would have to fly cargo, which could be, you know, 7-8 grand depending on how big your dog is. And then they have to stay at the Mickleham quarantine facility in Melbourne, which is another several $1,000s, probably $2,000 minimum. And then you've got the flights within Australia, because depending on where you're living in Australia, if you are not in Melbourne, you're going to have to fly the dog from Melbourne to wherever you are. So that's expensive. You're also paying the fee to have him, you know, on the paperwork for the permit. Now, initially I thought it would be cheaper to have Teddy, you know, properly certified as my assistance dog, but then if you don't already have them certified to like an ADI facility or something like that, that's going to cost you anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 to $20,000. But you should have your dog certified anyway. It's great training for them. It's totally worth it. Even in the US, even though you don't really have to have it, at least you know your dog is a proper service dog, and you're not just, you know, one of those people like on the airplane and they just slap a vest on it so they can fly it for free. Because somebody's dog tried to lunge at me last time I was on a plane, and thankfully I wasn't with Teddy, but it was like a giant golden doodle, and she was passing it off as a service dog, and he obviously was not trained. Thankfully, Teddy, like, we started him out as a pet on airplanes, and he was in the bag. I think he took 4 separate trips in the bag before we even got him to the point where we let him out of the bag. So once he came out and he was trained as a service dog and he was flying without the bag, he was like, look, I'm going to be the bestest boy in the whole wide world. Just please don't put me in the bag under the seat again. And he is. We get complimented on every flight. He knows how to go through TSA. There used to be a guy at the Key West airport who worked for Cesar Millan, and every time we came through that airport, he was like complimenting Teddy, and he was like, you know, I used to train dogs. I worked for Cesar, and you have the best behaved service dog we ever see, and we get a lot of them. So I'm really happy that he's such a good boy when we do that. But the other thing that Lisa told us was make sure that we don't fly Qantas, because when we fly from Texas to Australia, there's a flight on, like, you can always fly Qantas, and you know, Qantas is Australia's airline, but they were like, do not fly Qantas under any circumstances whatsoever, because they are not dog friendly. And so my husband, you know, has huge high status at American, so a lot of times I fly to Australia for free using points. But we have really good status on American, and Teddy is flown all over the US on American. So we called American, we're like, hey, I'm taking my dog to Australia, we want to make sure he can fly in cabin. And they were like, yes, absolutely. He's had like over 2 years history of flying with American in cabin, and so that's who we're flying with. And then we also upgraded, we're flying premium economy instead of regular economy, so we have a little bit more room. And we're also doing the, we've put in for an upgrade using points and money. And we've so far been given the upgrade from San Antonio to LA to first class. And then we have, I think it's 13 hours, because the 2 flights, you could either have 5 hours in LA, which is really just enough time to get irritated and annoyed and not really enough time to do anything. And I was like, you know what, let's do the flight where we get into LA at 8 a.m. We'll spend all day in LA, we'll go have fun, we'll go make a day trip of it, we'll take Teddy out, get him exhausted, let him eat, let him poop, let him do all the things. And then just like a kid, you get on a plane at, you know, 10 o'clock at night, and you're on there for 15 hours, and hopefully he's exhausted and he's tired and he sleeps all the way through. His bedtime's normally 9 o'clock, so he will already be well exhausted by the time we get on that plane. But basically what all this rambling boils down to is you either need to already have your dog certified through a facility in the country that you're in, preferably ADI International. If not, find someone like Lisa Robinson at Assistance Paws, who can then go through all of the things with you. She created my entire packet. She did the majority of the work. She was on me because I'm lazy. She's like, Sarah, I need this, I need this, I need this. And she made sure I had everything, and she pushed it through. She's certified in Australia, and so Teddy is now actually certified in Australia, which was much better for me, because when I was looking at the ADI facilities here to do him through and spend all that money, and then I was looking at things like in Australia for a train pass, they only accepted certain places, and the place that I was going to spend $10,000 on getting him trained here wasn't going to give him the paperwork needed to get him a train pass in Sydney. So Lisa has made it so that we can be verified in Australia. He's certified as an assistance dog in Australia before we even land, which means when I get there, yeah, I'm going to be looking for an apartment. I'm going to be looking, you know, to travel with Teddy, and so he already has like a rail pass. We will get him, she's going to assist me getting all of the things done in Australia, like the council registration and all of that. So I highly recommend Lisa. But if you can find other people like that, or, you know, get your dog registered before you leave. And then you've got all the paperwork. It's going to be at least a 7-month journey. And then you've got the flight over there. And then once you get there, hopefully everything's fine. I'm really hoping that I can find an apartment. I've got an Airbnb for the first month. And then that was interesting because Australia is not quite as used to service dogs or assistance dogs as the US is. So I had to call around because for the quarantine, Teddy cannot be in a place where there are any other mammals present. So I had to look at all these places that he would stay, and then I had to be like, hey, do you have any other animals there? Because there was a couple places that were absolutely gorgeous, and I totally wanted to stay there. And they were like, yeah, we're dog friendly. We actually have a dog. And I'm like, shit, I can't do it, because he has to be somewhere that does not have any other animals. And then a lot of apartment buildings in Australia are not, well, in Sydney, because they haven't changed the laws in New South Wales, are not dog friendly. And I have to explain, he's not a pet. He is exempt from that. He is a service animal. And if you're on Airbnb, you know, there's a whole thing about service animals. So like one guy, he had to go to his strata building and verify that they would allow an assistance animal to stay there. So we found a place, thankfully. So we're there for an entire month. So I've got a lot of time to look for a second place that we will live full time. That's not going to be fussy about having him there. But just know it can be done. It is a long journey, but you can do it, especially if you find someone like Lisa to help you along the way. But expect 7 months and at minimum 10 grand, because even if they're already certified, you're gonna spend a lot of money on vets. Like my husband makes fun that Teddy, it has already cost us 30 to 40 grand over the lifetime of all of his training, because he's been on board and trained several times, which is not cheap. And then, you know, all of the vet visits and all of that, it is expensive. So only take your dog to Australia if you are going for a lengthy period, or you intend to stay forever, or you just really cannot function without them. My in-laws were like, when we went through the first one and then we had to go through it again, my in-laws are in love with Teddy, and they were like, look, if you just need to go, we'll totally take him and, you know, care for him. That like I go to Australia for short visits without Teddy, and I hate it. And so I am definitely not moving there without him, because he's my world, he's my ears, he's my sanity. So I'm very glad we are now only 3 weeks out from landing. But if you have any questions, pop them in the comments below and I will answer those. I probably missed a whole bunch of stuff. So just ask any questions you have. Know that it can be done. It's not easy, but it does get easy once you find a Lisa to help you. And then Teddy just makes everything easier, because there's days where I just want to pull hair out and he just comes up and gives me a big old kiss and everything's better again. But it can be done. And like and subscribe, do all of the shit that everybody always asks you to do. But follow along, because probably the next update will be us at our last vet visit. And then I don't know if I'll be able to film while we're doing the whole Australia thing, because I'm gonna have so much luggage and a dog and a husband, and holding a camera might be too much, but I will try and film the journey of us going over so you can see what that's like. And then of course I do want to film what it's like having Teddy in Australia, because there's going to be all new smells and sounds, there's all kinds of birds, there's all new things. And then of course, what's it like trying to find accommodation going out in Australia with an assistance dog. And if you're in Australia and you see Teddy and I, wave at us and say hi. Say hi. There's some birds or something over there that he's looking at. We're at the ranch. Right, buddy? Another kiss? Thank you.